One of the world's wealthiest nations, the one with gleaming cities rising from its golden sand and oil reserves that generates endless prosperity, hides a vulnerability that keeps its leaders awake at night. The United Arab Emirates faces a dark reality that money alone may not solve. The nation's limited farmland and scarce water make large-scale agriculture nearly impossible. Built on desert sands, the Emirates imports more than 80% of its overall food consumption, utterly dependent on a global system that has repeatedly shown its fragility. First, the 2008 global food crisis struck like lightning and revealed just how vulnerable the nation was to food insecurity. Wheat, corn, and rice prices all climbed to unprecedented highs. The crisis passed, but the lesson remained burned into policy. Then, the pandemic disrupted supply chains worldwide, exposing once again the Emirates to shortages. Finally, the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine sent wheat prices soaring 60%, as Black Sea exports suddenly vanished. Again, the UAE felt the squeeze. The message was unmistakable. Financial ability to purchase food means nothing when global markets collapse. So, the Emirates looked toward the vast continent we call home. In this episode, we dive deep into how Africa is set to feed the Emirates and all the ramifications that comes with it. The continent emerged as a beacon of hope, with millions of acres of underutilized farmland stretching across Egypt, Sudan, and Kenya. Exactly what the UAE desperately needed. Africa holds 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, paired with abundant labor. The African Development Bank estimated that its food industry could reach $1 trillion by 2030. For a nation importing nearly all of its food, Africa's agricultural potential is more than attractive. It's essential. So the Emirates' actions to counter its food problem became methodical and ambitious. The National Food Security Strategy 2051 set an audacious goal: to position the country as the world's leader in food security and reduce import dependency to less than 50%. The strategy clearly planned to use wealth and influence to secure farmland abroad, then distribute products globally through the UAE's world-class logistics network. Key Emirati companies, often linked to ruling families and sovereign wealth funds, became the instruments of this vision. Al Dahra, Janan, an international holding company, began systematically acquiring agricultural assets across Africa, focusing on crops critical to the Emirates' needs. Alfalfa for the nation's dairy industry, wheat, cereals, and vegetables. The scale of the project is monumental. In Sudan, firms started farming over 50,000 hectares. That's almost 5 times the size of the city of Paris. Moreover, in 2022, International Holding Company signed a deal to develop an additional 162,000 hectares connected to a new port built by Abu Dhabi Ports Group. In Egypt, Emirati investments reached almost $40 billion. Al Dahra controls more than 60,000 acres across multiple farms and is negotiating to acquire additional land. As a result, it became the largest wheat producer in the country. Kenya represents the newest frontier for Emirati food security strategy. In 2025, Al Dahra signed agreements to lease and manage up to 200,000 acres of irrigated farmland in Kenya's Galana-Kulalu Ranch, with investments reaching up to $800 million. This project is one of the largest foreign direct investments in Kenya's agricultural sector and is designed to boost food security and domestic crop production. Abu Dhabi's ADQ also committed up to $500 million through a finance and investment framework agreement to invest in Kenya's food production. What began as a response to food insecurity has evolved into something far more ambitious, a vision to reshape how food moves around the world, with Africa as the foundation and the UAE as the global distribution hub. But as this agricultural empire expands, a fundamental question crystallizes. Is this a genuine partnership for mutual growth, or the beginning of a new scramble for Africa's fertile heartlands? The sun beats down mercilessly on Egypt's Toshka Desert, where something extraordinary is happening. What was once barren sand is now covered in green fields stretching to the horizon, a transformation funded by billions of dollars from thousands of miles away. Al Dahra's Egyptian operations reveal the true scale of this transformation. The Emirati agricultural giant has a sophisticated strategy that's reshaping the relationship between nations, resources, and food security in ways that few people understand. To grasp what's really happening here, imagine if a foreign company came to your country, took control of your most fertile land, used your scarcest resource to grow food, and then sold much of that food back to you while keeping the profits. That's essentially the arrangement Egypt has entered into with Al Dahra, and it represents a new form of resource extraction disguised as investment partnership. The Egyptian side of this equation proves this. Consider the water dimension, which represents perhaps the most concerning aspect of this arrangement. Egypt is already experiencing severe water stress, primarily because the Nile provides almost all of its fresh water, and the river's flow is increasingly threatened by upstream developments and rising domestic demand due to rapid population growth. Every hectare that Al Dahra farms represents thousands of cubic meters of water that could support Egyptian food production or urban development. Instead, it is essentially being exported in the form of crops that benefit UAE food security. The financial arrangements create additional layers of dependency that work against Egyptian interests. Under Al Dahra's current contracts, the company supplies wheat to Egyptian government silos at prices set by Egyptian authorities, which on the surface appears beneficial. Egypt receives domestically produced wheat, reducing its import burden and supporting food security. However, a deeper analysis confirms that Egypt is paying a foreign company to produce food on Egyptian land using Egyptian resources, while Al Dahra retains ownership of the production infrastructure and reaps long-term strategic benefits. This leverage ensures ongoing influence for Al Dahra and the UAE, while Egypt's dependency on these foreign-controlled assets increases over time. Today's resource relationships are built through complex commercial arrangements that create mutual dependencies while maintaining fundamental asymmetries in power and benefit distribution. The transformation of sand into farmland represents progress for sure, but progress for whom and at what cost? As these investments mature across Africa, both the Emirates and its partners face increasingly difficult questions about justice and sustainability. The promise appears substantial on paper. Technology transfer brings advanced agricultural practices, drought-resistant crop varieties, and precision farming techniques. Infrastructure development creates irrigation systems, dams, roads, and ports that can benefit entire regions. Job creation promises employment for millions across the continent. However, the reality often tells a different story. Many acquisitions face criticism as land grabs that dispossess communities of ancestral lands with little consultation or fair compensation. The focus on export-oriented production frequently comes at the expense of local food security. Oftentimes in business stories, the African agency is widely overlooked, and maybe it is time the continent stopped positioning itself as the victim of bad deals, exploitation, and shady politicians, and recognize that these deals are more complex and evolving. A relationship that contains elements of both opportunity and risk, development and dependency, innovation and extraction. Let me try to balance it out. In Kenya, Al Dahra's investment in advanced irrigation infrastructure has enabled farming in areas previously considered too arid for reliable crop production. More significantly, the project includes mandatory technology transfer components that train Kenyan agricultural technicians in precision farming methods, creating skills that extend far beyond the immediate project. Local farmers working adjacent to Al Dahra's operations report improved yields after adopting drought-resistant seed varieties, originally introduced for the UAE project. The irrigation systems built for export crops also supply water to nearby smallholder farms during off-seasons, creating shared infrastructure benefits that weren't originally planned but have emerged through practical cooperation. Similarly, in Egypt's New Valley region, Al Dahra's operations have created approximately 8,000 direct jobs in areas with previously limited economic opportunities. While critics rightfully point to the water usage concerns, the reality on the ground includes Egyptian engineers leading major portions of the operation, gaining expertise in large-scale agricultural management that positions Egypt's agricultural sector for broader modernization. When Kenya signed agreements with UAE agricultural companies, the country wasn't acting from desperation, but rather from a calculated strategy to leverage foreign investment for domestic agricultural transformation. The government structured these deals to address Kenya's own food security challenges while building agricultural capacity that serves national development goals. Moreover, these agricultural relationships are not static arrangements, but evolving partnerships that respond to changing circumstances and growing experience on both sides. The more deals get done, the more African governments gain experience in structuring these partnerships more favorably. Newer agreements typically include stronger environmental protections, clearer benefit-sharing mechanisms, and more robust technology transfer requirements compared to earlier deals. I argue that the African Continental Free Trade Area is the shield against resource extraction. By creating a unified market of 1.3 billion people with over $3.4 trillion in combined GDP, the African trade area transforms 54 separate, vulnerable economies into a single negotiating bloc that can demand equitable partnerships rather than accept extractive arrangements. When UAE agricultural companies can no longer exploit regulatory differences between countries or pressure individual governments facing immediate fiscal needs, the entire dynamic shifts from extraction to genuine partnership. The fragmentation that currently enables resource extraction becomes impossible under continental integration. Today, UAE investors engage in forum shopping. If Egypt demands stronger environmental protections, they move to Sudan. If Kenya requires better revenue sharing, they shift to other markets. The Continental Free Trade Area enables a collective bargaining power that mirrors how the European Union prevents tech companies from exploiting regulatory arbitrage. The network effects of integration create exponential strength. As African countries become more economically connected, each individual nation gains alternatives that reduce vulnerability to external pressure. But this is a subject for another episode on trade. You made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching.